16-year-old foster child Marcus Thompson was found beaten and left for dead in the Nevada desert after his foster sister's false molestation accusation tore their family apart. But 3 days later, when a park ranger discovers him clinging to life behind a boulder, what Marcus whispers changes everything and exposes the shocking truth that would save his life and destroy the real predator. The Peterson family of Reno, Nevada, seemed like the perfect foster home. David Peterson, a respected construction foreman, and his wife Rebecca, a part-time nurse, had been fostering children for over 8 years. Their 14-year-old daughter Vanessa was known throughout their neighborhood as a sweet, well-behaved teenager who welcomed each new foster sibling with open arms. But on that scorching July morning when Marcus Thompson arrived at their doorstep, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and years of pain, none of them could have predicted the devastating chain of events that would nearly cost him his life. Marcus had been in the foster system since he was 7 years old. His parents had died in a car accident, leaving him with no relatives willing to take him in. He had bounced between 6 different homes, each placement ending in disappointment and heartbreak. The Petersons were supposed to be his fresh start, his chance at finally finding a family that would love and protect him. Instead, they became the stage for one of the most twisted cases of manipulation and attempted murder that Nevada authorities had ever encountered. The Peterson home sat on Elm Street in a quiet residential area of Reno, where neighbors knew each other by name, and children played freely in well-maintained yards. David Peterson had built their house himself, taking pride in every detail from the hand-carved wooden banister to the perfectly manicured garden that Rebecca tended with devotion. They had been married for 15 years, and their decision to become foster parents came after struggling with infertility for nearly a decade. Rebecca Peterson had always dreamed of having a house full of children. When doctors informed her that she would likely never have more children after Vanessa, she convinced David that fostering was their calling. Over the years, they had welcomed 12 children into their home, ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers. Most placements had been temporary, lasting only a few months while permanent homes were found, but 3 children had stayed with them for over 2 years each, and the Petersons had grown to love them as their own. Vanessa Peterson was their biological daughter, born when Rebecca was 32 years old. She had grown up surrounded by foster siblings, and neighbors often commented on how mature and compassionate she seemed for her age. Teachers at her middle school praised her academic performance and her kindness toward younger students. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and had never given her parents a moment of trouble. When Marcus Thompson arrived on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July, he was their 13th foster child. His caseworker, Linda Martinez, had specifically requested the Peterson family because of their excellent track record with teenage boys. Marcus had been living in a group home for 6 months after his previous foster family had given up on him, citing behavioral issues and difficulty connecting with their other children. The 16-year-old stood on their front porch that morning, his dark hair falling across his eyes, shoulders hunched, as if he were trying to make himself invisible. He had learned not to get his hopes up about new placements. Too many families had seemed welcoming at first, only to change their minds when they realized he was not the grateful, easy child they had expected. David Peterson opened the door with a genuine smile, extending his hand for a firm handshake. Rebecca appeared behind him, her face lighting up with the kind of warmth that had comforted dozens of children over the years. Vanessa peeked around her mother, offering a shy wave that seemed perfectly natural for a teenager meeting a new foster brother. The first few weeks went remarkably well. Marcus was quiet but polite, helping with household chores without being asked, and never causing any trouble. He had missed nearly a full year of school due to his unstable living situation, but he was intelligent and eager to catch up. Rebecca spent hours each evening helping him with his studies, and David included him in weekend projects around the house. Vanessa appeared to welcome Marcus with open arms. She introduced him to her friends, invited him to watch movies with her in the evenings, and even defended him when other kids at school made comments about him being a foster child. The Petersons began to discuss the possibility of adoption, believing they had finally found the right fit for their family. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect adjustment, something dark was beginning to take root. Vanessa had grown accustomed to being the center of attention in her household. For 14 years, She had been the constant in a rotating cast of temporary siblings. Foster children came and went, but she remained the Petersons' beloved daughter, the one who would never leave. Marcus was different from the other foster children they had welcomed. He was closer to Vanessa's age, which meant he needed different types of attention and support. Rebecca spent significant time helping him with his education, and David began including him in father-son activities that had previously been reserved for brief visits with younger foster children who would soon move on. For the first time in her life, Vanessa felt like she was competing for her parents' attention. She watched as her mother patiently explained algebra concepts to Marcus night after night. She noticed how her father's face lit up when Marcus showed interest in construction techniques and tools. Most disturbing of all, she overheard her parents discussing adoption with Marcus's caseworker during a phone call that they thought was private. The realization that Marcus might become a permanent member of their family triggered something dangerous in Vanessa's mind. She had always been praised for her maturity and kindness, but she was still a 14-year-old girl who had never learned to cope with feelings of jealousy and displacement. Instead of talking to her parents about her concerns, she began to plot a way to remove Marcus from their lives permanently. The change in Vanessa's behavior began subtly. She started making small comments about Marcus that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but carried an undertone of suspicion. She mentioned to her mother that Marcus had been looking at her strangely. She told her father that Marcus had made a comment about her appearance that made her uncomfortable. When pressed for details, she would become evasive, claiming she did not want to make a big deal out of nothing. Rebecca and David initially dismissed these concerns as normal adjustment issues. They had seen similar dynamics before, when foster children and biological children were close in age. They encouraged Vanessa to give Marcus more time, and reminded her that he had been through significant trauma. They suggested family activities that would help everyone bond and feel more comfortable together. But Vanessa's comments became more frequent and more specific. She began keeping a journal where she documented every interaction with Marcus, twisting innocent moments into something sinister. When Marcus complimented her new haircut, she wrote that he was staring at her inappropriately. When he asked to borrow her phone charger, she recorded that he was trying to get access to her personal information. The breaking point came on a humid August evening, when the family was watching a movie together in the living room. Marcus had been reaching for the remote control when he accidentally brushed against Vanessa's arm. It was a completely innocent contact that lasted less than a second, but Vanessa immediately jumped up from the couch, claiming that Marcus had touched her inappropriately. David and Rebecca were stunned by the accusation. They had been sitting right there and had not noticed anything unusual. Marcus was equally shocked, stammering that he had only been trying to reach the remote. But Vanessa was insistent, tears streaming down her face as she accused Marcus of deliberately touching her in a way that made her uncomfortable. The evening ended with Marcus being sent to his room, while David and Rebecca tried to process what had happened. They wanted to believe their daughter, but they had not seen anything inappropriate occur. They decided to have separate conversations with both children to try to understand the situation better. Over the next several days, Vanessa's accusations became more serious and more frequent. She claimed that Marcus had been entering her room without permission, that he had been watching her through her bedroom window, and that he had made sexual comments about her body. Each accusation was vague enough that it could not be easily disproven, but serious enough to cause alarm. Marcus vehemently denied every allegation, but his denials only seemed to make him appear more guilty in David Peterson's eyes. The construction foreman had always been protective of his daughter, and the thought that someone might be harming her triggered a rage that he had never experienced before. He began watching Marcus constantly, looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Rebecca was torn between her maternal instincts to protect Vanessa and her growing suspicion that something was not right about the accusations. She had spent countless hours with Marcus over the past 2 months, and nothing about his behavior had ever seemed concerning. He was respectful, polite, and had never shown any signs of the predatory behavior that Vanessa was describing. The situation reached a crisis point when Vanessa claimed that Marcus had attempted to sexually assault her while their parents were out grocery shopping. She ran to her room and locked the door, sobbing hysterically when David and Rebecca returned home. Through her tears, she told them that Marcus had cornered her in the hallway and tried to force himself on her, only backing off when he heard their car in the driveway. This final accusation shattered any remaining doubt in David Peterson's mind. He called Marcus into the living room and confronted him with Vanessa's claims. Marcus denied everything with increasing desperation, but his protests fell on deaf ears. David was consumed with fury, convinced that this troubled foster child had been preying on his innocent daughter. Rebecca called Linda Martinez, Marcus's caseworker, to report the allegations and request immediate removal from their home. But Linda was in court all day and could not respond until the following morning. That meant Marcus would have to spend one more night in the Peterson house, a prospect that filled David with rage. The tension in the house that evening was suffocating. Marcus was confined to his room, while Vanessa stayed close to her parents, playing the role of traumatized victim with devastating effectiveness. David paced the house like a caged animal, checking and rechecking the locks on Vanessa's bedroom door, his anger building with each passing hour. Marcus lay in his bed that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what was happening to his life. He had finally found a family that seemed to care about him, a place where he thought he could belong. Now he was being accused of horrible things that he had never done, and he could see the hatred in David Peterson's eyes. He knew that by morning he would be removed from their home, and probably placed back in the group facility where he had been so miserable. What Marcus did not know was that David Peterson had already decided that morning could not come soon enough. The rage that had been building inside him for days had reached a boiling point. He had convinced himself that Marcus was a dangerous predator who had been manipulating his family, and he was not willing to wait for the system to handle the situation. At 2 o'clock in the morning, David Peterson stood outside Marcus's bedroom door, his hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. He had been unable to sleep, tormented by images of what he believed Marcus had tried to do to his daughter. Every protective instinct he possessed was screaming at him to take action, to ensure that this boy could never hurt another child again. David quietly opened the door and stepped into the dark room. Marcus was lying on his side, facing the wall, his breathing steady and peaceful. The sight of the teenager sleeping so calmly while his daughter was traumatized filled David with an even deeper rage. He reached down and roughly shook Marcus awake. Marcus sat up in confusion, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. Before he could ask what was happening, David grabbed him by the arm and pulled him from the bed. In a harsh whisper, David told Marcus to get dressed and come with him immediately. When Marcus asked why, David's response was a cold threat that if he made any noise or tried to wake up Rebecca and Vanessa, things would be much worse for him. Still half asleep and thoroughly confused, Marcus pulled on his clothes and followed David out of the house. David led him to his pickup truck, which was parked on the street instead of in the driveway. He ordered Marcus to get in the passenger seat and remained silent as they drove through the empty streets of Reno. Marcus asked repeatedly where they were going and what was happening, but David refused to answer. The construction foreman was focused on a plan that had been forming in his mind for hours. He was going to take Marcus somewhere remote, somewhere he could teach him a lesson that would ensure he never hurt another child again. They drove for over an hour, heading southeast toward the Nevada desert. David turned off the main highway onto a dirt road that led to an abandoned mining area where he had worked on construction projects years earlier. The location was miles from any houses or businesses, surrounded by nothing but sand, rocks, and scrub brush. When David finally stopped the truck, Marcus could see nothing but empty desert in every direction. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the only light came from the truck's headlights. David got out and walked around to the passenger side, ordering Marcus to get out as well. What happened next was a brutal attack that nearly cost Marcus his life. David Peterson, consumed by rage and convinced that he was protecting his daughter, began beating the 16-year-old with his fists and a metal pipe that he had brought from his construction site. Marcus tried to defend himself, but he was no match for the larger, stronger man who was attacking him with the fury of a parent protecting his child. The assault lasted nearly 20 minutes. David beat Marcus until the teenager collapsed to the ground, his face bloodied and his body broken. Convinced that Marcus was dead, David threw the metal pipe aside and walked back to his truck. He drove away without looking back, leaving Marcus lying motionless in the desert sand. But Marcus was not dead. The beating had left him severely injured, with a concussion, broken ribs, and internal bleeding, but he was still breathing. As the sound of the truck engine faded into the distance, Marcus managed to drag himself behind a large boulder, where he lay semi-unconscious for the next 3 days. Back in Reno, David Peterson returned home and went to bed, telling himself that he had done what was necessary to protect his family. When Rebecca woke up the next morning and found Marcus's room empty, David claimed that the boy had run away during the night, probably because he knew his lies were about to be exposed. Rebecca called Linda Martinez to report Marcus's disappearance, and the caseworker immediately contacted the police. A search was organized, but it focused on the Reno area, where runaway teenagers were most likely to be found. No one thought to look in the remote desert areas where David had left Marcus to die. For 3 days, the search continued without success. David played the role of concerned foster father, joining search parties and expressing worry about Marcus's safety. Vanessa maintained her story about the attempted assault, telling anyone who would listen that Marcus had probably run away because he was afraid of being arrested. But on the 4th day, everything changed when a park ranger named Thomas Mitchell was conducting a routine patrol in the desert area where Marcus had been abandoned. Ranger Thomas Mitchell had been patrolling the remote desert area southeast of Reno for over 15 years. He knew every trail, every abandoned building, and every hiding spot that might attract campers, hikers, or people looking for privacy. On that scorching Thursday morning, he was checking an area that had been the site of several illegal dumping incidents over the past year. As he drove his Park Service vehicle along the dusty trail, something caught his eye near a cluster of large boulders. At first he thought it might be a discarded piece of clothing or camping equipment, but as he got closer, he realized it was a person lying motionless in the sand. Thomas immediately radioed for emergency medical assistance and ran toward the figure. What he found was a teenage boy, barely conscious, severely dehydrated, and covered in blood and bruises. The boy's lips were cracked from thirst, his face was swollen almost beyond recognition, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Thomas knelt beside Marcus and gently tried to rouse him. The teenager's eyes fluttered open, and he tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. Thomas gave him small sips of water from his canteen and assured him that help was on the way. As they waited for the medical helicopter to arrive, Marcus managed to whisper a few words that would change everything. Marcus told Thomas that his name was Marcus Thompson and that he was a foster child from Reno. He said that his foster father had brought him to the desert and beaten him, leaving him to die. But then he said something that shocked Thomas to his core. He insisted that he had never done anything wrong, that the accusations against him were lies, and that someone needed to check on his foster sister because she was in danger from the real predator. When the medical helicopter arrived, Thomas accompanied Marcus to the hospital, while radioing ahead to notify the Reno Police Department about what the boy had told him. Marcus was rushed into emergency surgery, where doctors worked for hours to save his life. He had suffered severe head trauma, internal bleeding, and was dangerously dehydrated, but he was alive. Detective Rachel Warren was assigned to investigate Marcus's case. She had been working in the juvenile division for 12 years and had seen too many cases of children being abused by the very people who were supposed to protect them. But something about Marcus's story did not add up with the information she had received from the Peterson family. Detective Warren interviewed Marcus as soon as doctors cleared him to speak. Despite his injuries and trauma, Marcus was coherent and consistent in his account of what had happened. He maintained his innocence regarding the accusations Vanessa had made, and he expressed genuine concern for her safety, saying that he believed someone in the household was hurting her and that she had been forced to lie about him. This revelation prompted Detective Warren to take a much closer look at the Peterson family. She began by interviewing neighbors, teachers, and anyone else who had regular contact with the family. What she discovered was a pattern of behavior that had been hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect home. Several of Vanessa's teachers mentioned that her academic performance had declined significantly over the past year. Her grades had dropped from A's and B's to C's and D's, and she had become withdrawn and anxious in class. The school counselor had noticed that Vanessa seemed fearful around adult men and had been asking questions about inappropriate touching during their health education classes. Most shocking of all, Detective Warren discovered that Vanessa had been seeing a therapist for the past 6 months, but her parents had been told that the sessions were for help with study skills and time management. The therapist, bound by confidentiality, could not reveal details of their sessions, but she was able to confirm that Vanessa had been dealing with trauma related to sexual abuse. Armed with this information, Detective Warren obtained a search warrant for the Peterson home. What she found in David Peterson's workshop would lead to his arrest and the truth about what had really been happening in their household. Hidden in a locked toolbox in the garage, Detective Warren discovered a collection of inappropriate photographs of Vanessa that had been taken without her knowledge. There were also disturbing written fantasies about his daughter and evidence that he had been secretly entering her room at night for months. The horrifying truth was that David Peterson had been sexually abusing his own daughter for nearly a year. Vanessa had been too frightened and confused to tell anyone directly, but when Marcus arrived and her parents began talking about adoption, she realized that having a permanent witness in the house might be her only chance to escape her father's abuse. Vanessa had created the false accusations against Marcus as a desperate attempt to get him removed from their home before he could discover what was happening to her. She had hoped that if Marcus was gone, she could find another way to get help, but when her lies led to Marcus being nearly murdered, she realized that her plan had gone horribly wrong. The revelation of David Peterson's crime sent shockwaves through the Reno community. The man who had been respected as a devoted father and model citizen was arrested and charged with child sexual abuse, attempted murder, and aggravated assault. The investigation revealed that his abuse of Vanessa had been escalating for months, and that her false accusations against Marcus had been a desperate cry for help. Rebecca Peterson was devastated by the discovery of her husband's crimes. She had been completely unaware of what was happening to her daughter, and the guilt of not recognizing the signs consumed her. She immediately filed for divorce and entered therapy to process her own trauma and learn how to support Vanessa through her recovery. Vanessa Peterson faced the enormous challenge of dealing with the aftermath of her father's abuse and the guilt of what her lies had nearly cost Marcus. She was placed in intensive therapy and eventually entered a residential treatment program where she could heal in a safe environment. With the support of skilled counselors, she began to understand that her father's abuse was not her fault, and that her desperate attempt to protect herself, while misguided, came from a place of fear and survival. Marcus Thompson spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from his injuries. The physical wounds healed, but the emotional trauma of being nearly murdered by someone he had trusted would take much longer to address. However, Marcus showed remarkable resilience and forgiveness that amazed everyone who worked with him. When Vanessa was finally able to face Marcus, she broke down in tears and begged for his forgiveness. She explained that she had never intended for him to be hurt, that she had only wanted him to be moved to another home so that she could find a way to escape her father's abuse. Marcus, despite everything he had been through, was able to forgive her, understanding that she had been a victim trying to survive in the only way she knew how. Linda Martinez, Marcus's caseworker, found him a new placement with a family that had extensive experience working with children who had experienced trauma. The Rodriguez family welcomed Marcus with open arms, providing him with the therapeutic support and unconditional love that he needed to heal. For the first time in his life, Marcus found himself in a home where he truly belonged. The case prompted significant changes in how Nevada's child welfare system handled allegations of abuse within foster families. New protocols were established to ensure that all children in a household were interviewed individually when accusations were made, and additional training was provided to caseworkers to help them recognize signs of abuse that might be hidden beneath the surface. David Peterson was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes. During his trial, the full extent of his manipulation and abuse was revealed, showing how he had used his position as a respected foster parent to hide his predatory behavior. The judge noted that his attempt to murder Marcus was not only a heinous crime, but also a calculated effort to silence a potential witness to his abuse. The story of Marcus Thompson and Vanessa Peterson became a powerful reminder that child abuse can happen in any family, regardless of how perfect they might appear on the surface. It highlighted the importance of listening to children when they try to communicate their fears, even when their messages are unclear or seem contradictory. Marcus eventually graduated from high school with honors and received a full scholarship to college, where he studied social work with the goal of helping other children who had experienced trauma. His experience taught him that healing is possible, even after the most devastating betrayals, and that forgiveness can be a powerful tool for moving forward. Vanessa Peterson also found her path to healing, eventually becoming an advocate for other young survivors of sexual abuse. She learned to use her experience to help other children find their voices and get the help they needed. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate showed that even the darkest situations can lead to positive change when met with proper support and treatment. The case serves as a crucial reminder that we must always look beneath the surface when children are in distress. Vanessa's false accusations were not malicious lies, but desperate attempts to protect herself from ongoing abuse. Marcus's near-death experience was the tragic result of a system that failed to recognize the real danger lurking within what appeared to be a safe home. If you have been moved by Marcus and Vanessa's story, please consider supporting organizations that work to protect children in foster care. These brave survivors want their experience to help others, and the best way to honor their courage is to ensure that other children receive the protection and support they deserve. Share this story with others who might need to hear it, because sometimes the most powerful tool we have in protecting children is simply being aware that danger can hide behind the most innocent facades.